Good morning.
Good morning, Ken.
Today is the anniversary of the Kitty Hawk flight.
The Kitty Hawk fight?
Flight,
Oh, flight. Oh,
the Wright brothers.
I've been to that museum. It's pretty fascinating.
Oh, was the one in Dayton or the one in North Carolina?
The one on the Outer Banks.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
It was, they mark off how far they flew, and it is amazing that was the beginning. I mean, it was such a little short distance.
You could throw a baseball that far.
Yeah. Yes. Well, maybe not me, but somebody could.
Yeah. Well, once upon a time. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It was pretty fascinating.
They tossed up for who would be on the ground and who would be on the plane, and Orville got the right to be in the plane.
There you go. That was a pun, wasn't it? Got the right?
Yes. I think they started off with straws, and then they went to 2 boxes, and then there was envelopes inside the boxes.
But was there Grant's chocolate? Like in our meeting?
Yes. I don't know about that. I remember I saw their bicycle shop in Greenfield Village in Michigan when I was a kid.
Okay. Yeah.
Pretty interesting.
Henry Ford found historic places like that all over the country and moved them all up to Dearborn, Michigan.
I've never been up there. It sounds like it'd be worth a trip.
It is actually, and I think there's actually an Amtrak stop right at the entrance to the village.
Which is kind of counterintuitive. Most people think that's forward.
Sounds like I put it on my to-do list.
There's also the Henry Ford Museum, which is just everything about everything.
Yeah, I'll bet.
But especially transportation.
What was that they break in and
There's a couple,
keys must have been in there somewhere.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
I have to heard my cats here a little bit. Good morning. It's 9 o'clock and I am Mavis Bates, and I would like to call to order today's meeting of the Energy and Environmental Committee. Clerk, please call the roll.
Woznicki,
Present.
Allen,
Caius present.
Molina,
Lena present.
Strathman,
Strathman present.
Wallace,
Wallace here.
Shepro,
Shepro here.
Bates.
Bates here.
You have quorum.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. We have a very interesting meeting planned for you. May I have a motion to approve the minutes from November 12th?
Caius move.
Nikki seconds.
Kaisa Monicky, any discussions, any items? Please call the roll.
Caius,
Caius, yes.
Molina,
Paulina, yes.
Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Wallace,
Wallace, yes.
Woznicki,
Yes.
Bates.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Is there any public comment? Online, present, in writing? That sounded like a public comment. No comments? Okay, then I would like to ask Jody Wolnick to give us a presentation on, oops, she's not giving the presentation on Fox River dams.
That's
but
okay. I
Jody,
can
you wanna
introduce
start?
Rob
Okay.
Linke. He's a senior water resource engineer and our wetland specialist for Kane County, and has graciously agreed to come and tell us all about the Fox River this morning. I know we've had a great amount of interest in that, and we've had many board members asking us the status of the river. And so I think he has a great presentation. I'll turn it over to Rob.
Thank you very much, Jody. Thank you for the opportunity, members of the committee, to come and address you and give you an update on the status of and conditions of the Fox River. We're going to talk about the Fox River in general, and then we're going to focus in on what's happening with the various dams along the rivers. They have a tremendous impact on the quality and condition of the river. And so let me advance my slides here. So I think before we zoom in or focus in on the dams, it's important to talk about the Fox River as a whole to put those things in context. So the Fox River Watershed spans 2 states. It's about 2,600 square miles. The river itself is about 200 miles long. If you took all of the actual streams within the river and laid them end to end, they would actually stretch from Washington, D.C. all the way to Los Angeles. So there's a very high density network of streams within the Fox River watershed. When we talk about the people in the watershed, there's a vast amount of jurisdictions that span across the watershed. We have 93 municipalities just within Illinois alone.
Is there another Fox River in Wisconsin?
There
Like
is.
up
There
by
is. There is
Green Bay?
another Fox River. We don't like to talk about it.
Appleton,
What?
it's up by Appleton.
That's correct. And it drains up north and
Very
through Green Bay.
confusing. Okay, thank you.
So yes, but our Fox River here that drains south from Wisconsin, from the Colgate, Wisconsin, just west, or I guess it would be northwest of the Milwaukee area, drains down for about 200 miles through Illinois, and it has its confluence with the Illinois River just upstream of Starved Rock down in Ottawa. And so when we talk about the river and its dams, it's important to understand some of the history of what happened here. If we zoom in on Kane County, for example, in the late 1830s, as the early settlers and pioneers were making their way westward from Chicago, heading out towards Galena and the Mississippi River, they had to cross the Fox River Valley. And many people noted the great conditions of this steep, gravelly, and bedrock-lined river, the abundant timber along the Fox River Valley, and they noted that it would be a perfect place to set up shop there, to construct sawmills and other operations in that. And so the county quickly grew. As you can see there, in 1840, the population was about 6,500. Now on the map on the right, the little black dots that you see along the river itself actually are the dams that were constructed early on by those early settlers. And it should be no surprise when you look at the profile of the Fox River as to why there was such a high concentration of settlement and dam construction in Kane County itself. If you look at this profile of the river, the Fox River is actually a little unique compared to many other rivers, particularly in the Midwest. Usually you have very steep headwaters, and then the river would flatten out as you get down to its confluence. And as you can see here in this profile, it's actually the opposite. It's very steep up the headwaters, but then it flattens out for a long stretch through the Chain of Lakes area. And then as you see, when we go from Algonquin down through Montgomery through this Kane County area, the river is almost like a water slide in its in the amount of steepness or slope through the Fox River Valley area. And again, that highlights why it was so conducive for the construction of all of the dams in that, which again, at that time in early settlement, constructing dams was the principal way of providing mechanical power to drive the industries. And so those early dams were constructed from timber and stone cribbing. And so this is an example of what they would have looked like. These dams were frequently washed out. The early ones that were put in, if you look at the King County's history, there are many notes of dams being constructed and then being washed out by what they refer to as a spring freshet. So early on, the dams were something that were continually maintained and rebuilt and constructed upstream and downstream of maybe the former site when one was washed out from one year to the next. But then, of course, when the railroads came through in 1849, that really kind of put the development into overdrive. And with that, we saw a lot more, the population grew. There was a lot more industry along the rivers. The dams themselves, as technology increased, were reconstructed. Instead of using timber crib construction, they were constructed with things like concrete. And so those are, that's what we see on most of the dams, or excuse me, on all of the dams that we have today. The Fox River itself was utilized for a number of things besides the mechanical water power for to grind flour for sawmills and things like that. The Fox River, interestingly enough, was one of the primary sources of ice for the city of Chicago in the late 1800s. And you can see there in the notes about 120,000 tons could be stored up in the Elgin ice houses in and of themselves, in addition to ones that were upstream and downstream of there. There's a picture of one. I couldn't find one for Elgin, but I did find one picture of an ice house down in Oswego. So it gives you an idea of what those might have looked like. But of course, as the population increased and there was more and more development with no real oversight of what happened and what people were doing and discharging into the river, pollution soon became a problem. And so by 1909, the Chicago Board of Health actually banned Fox River ice from being used in the city of Chicago, and that all but killed off the ice harvesting industry. Another interesting part of Fox River history is that before the advent of plastics, mussels were harvested out of the Fox River, particularly in the southern part of the Fox River, and they were used for buttons. And so there were many industries or companies that opened up in the south part of the river, and they actually would harvest these mussels by taking these john boats out. They would drag these lines, and as the lines went across the mussels that were open, which of course were filtering the water, they would close up and they would pull those mussels in, and then they ran them through a machine that would actually punch holes in them. I actually have one here after the meeting if anybody wants to see one. They're kind of hard to find, but if you look, if you find the right place to look in the Fox River Watershed, particularly down in the Yorkville area, you'll actually find a couple of these. So they're kind of interesting. So, but again, it was another indication, or yet another industry that kind of sprang up, was utilized the Fox River during that time period. And then of course, as time went on, we had, better products, the plastics came in, and then of course, that was no longer used. So it's kind of an ongoing theme. So we had all of this development that was occurring along the Fox River from the late 1800s and through the 1930s. It wasn't until 1899 the River and Harbors Act was passed. And that was the first federal legislation that basically put in laws in place. Prior to that, people could just go out. If a landowner next to the river wanted to build a dam, he just built a dam. If he wanted to fill in part of the river in order to have better access to it, he just did it. And so 1899, that changed. There were federal laws established. Of course, again, with the added development, increased population, there were no standards for water pollution. So it wasn't until the 1920s that people started noticing that the condition of the river was so bad that they started building wastewater treatment plants. That's when many of our treatment plants up and down the Fox River were constructed. You can see some other notes there. PCBs were used as electricity was more prevalent in the area. There were PCBs that were used in that process with the transformers, and that became a pollutant that was discharged into the river. And we still deal with PCBs today in some of the sediments. The first water pollution legislation was in 1948. And then I think everybody's familiar with the 1972 Clean Water Act, those amendments that were made to that Federal Water Pollution Control Act to further clean up the river. And what we saw in the Fox River in particular was the water quality was very poor up until the Clean Water Act, and then it got dramatically better. But what's interesting is now we've kind of fallen into this point where we've kind of hit a little bit of a plateau because of the amount of demands that we're putting on the river, the number of people, the number of discharges, and that. And I have some slides that'll show that. And so while the Clean Water Act was a tremendous benefit to the Fox River, it wasn't the be all end all, and the work is certainly not done. So when we talk about the Fox River today, just to kind of put it in context of what we have here as far as resources, only about 12% of the land area within the Fox River watershed in the Illinois portion is considered our natural resources in terms of our rivers, streams, wetlands, woodlands, and things like that. And so you can see on the slide or the map on the right, the areas in pink represent our urbanized areas. Those in yellow represent the agricultural row crops and things like that. go to the next slide. Oops, here, I'll go back to this. And so all of the biodiversity that we come to recognize in the Fox River really lives within that 12%. So that would be those little green slivers that we see along the blue lines that represent the Fox River and the streams that drain into it. And so these would be like our prairies, the floodplain forests, the woodlands, our wetlands. That all makes up the green infrastructure. And I think, as all of you are aware, King County has a green infrastructure plan, and that recognizes that the green infrastructure as though the interconnected network of these natural areas that really provides the reserve for our county's biodiversity. And so it's a really important land asset that we need to actively manage. And yes.
So is 12% a good number or not good enough?
Well, it's very low, but it's just a consequence of the as the county in the northern Illinois was settled and again converted from wetland and prairie landscape to the agricultural production. So I think what it highlights is that it's very important that we protect the natural resources, those features that we have left. For example, in King County, we have about 3,600 acres of wetlands left in the county. That's out of the county itself is 335,000 acres. So that's about 1%. Only about 1% of the county is wetlands. And so when we talk about these biological resources, 1,000 species of native plants, 250 species of birds, almost 100 species of fish, and et cetera, there. The majority of these flora and fauna rely on that 12% of the remaining natural areas that we have. So, and of course, within there, we have a number of state threatened and endangered species. And so those are something that we use those in order to try to take extra caution in protecting those remaining wetlands and the rivers and streams.
So which one is federally endangered? The turtle?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Blanding's turtle?
Eastern prairie fringe orchid is one of the federally protected plants. There's only a few that are at the federal level. There's many state ones, and I don't have those offhand.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So we talked about the 12% of the county that is, or 12% of the watershed rather, that is remaining in those natural areas. About 50% of the watershed is agricultural row crops, and then about a third of the watershed is urban development. So those would be our subdivisions, our strip malls, our downtown areas, et cetera, et cetera. And with that development and the people that live in those areas, we rely on the Fox River to provide a number of services for us. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that the Fox River provides drinking water for a little more than 300,000 people. City of Elgin and City of Aurora take their drinking water, a large portion of the drinking water, from the Fox River. And so they rely on the clean water in the river for their water supplies. Likewise, all of those, the people in the watershed, they discharge their stormwater. When it rains, the water washes off their landscape. That goes into the ditches and swales, and then ultimately into the tributaries, and then finally into the Fox River. So we rely on the Fox River to carry and assimilate and treat our stormwater. Likewise, all of the wastewater that's discharged from all of our municipal treatment plants that is discharged into the Fox River. And you can see some of the numbers there. When you look at the total number of permitted discharges, there's about 160 permitted discharges that the IEPA has issued a permit to discharge some amount of water into the Fox River. When you add all of that up and you look at what the projected base flow is in the Fox River under low flow conditions, the amount of water that is allowed to be technically discharged into the river actually exceeds the low flow natural flow in the river. So, and what that tells us is that when we get to extreme low flow conditions in the Fox River, the vast majority of that flow is actually made up of treated discharges that are coming from further upstream in the watershed. So how we treat that wastewater that's discharged into the river becomes very, very important.
Rob, Madam Chair, could I ask a question?
Please.
I had been told at one time that during the extreme low flow, that the amount of effluent in the river is about 82% of what's actually in the river. Is that an accurate number?
It's probably not far off. And again, part of it gets back to what's permitted to discharge versus what's actually discharged. So if you think about it, during a drought condition, the treatment plants have a permit and they're allowed to discharge at a certain level, but under drought conditions, they're discharging much lower than that. So, but that number is probably not too far off. I don't know if anybody's actually crunched the hard numbers. So, but it does present a challenge. And again, we'll get to how those things play into with how the river's been managed and that in terms of the dam. So that definitely plays into that. So in addition to
Shepro, follow up if I might, Madam
Sure.
Chair.
Yes, please.
I wanted to ask about the opposite situation. I know in Chicago, oftentimes, at least in the past, if there were heavy rains and so forth, they would have to reverse the flow of the Chicago River. And when stuff got into Lake Michigan, they would close the beaches. If we've got a spring freshet or a heavy summer rain, does that result in telling the people who have permitted discharge that they have to reduce it? Or how is that, and does that affect the Elgin or the drinking water if there's too much of the wrong kind of water flowing in?
Sure. Well, certainly when we do have precipitation events, heavy storms here in the Fox River Watershed, that is one source of pollution. So if you think about the permitted dischargers, the wastewater plants, they're discharging 24/7, 365 days a year. They're providing treatment. They have to hit certain water quality standards for the water that's being discharged from their plant. When you contrast that to what's called non-point source flow or non-point source pollution, that is the pollution that washes off the landscape during those heavy rains. And so that also contributes to water quality problems in the Fox River. Certainly when we have precipitation that occurs in the agricultural landscape, we have additional nutrients that are washing off of those fields that are going into the river. And so it really becomes a question of how can the river assimilate those, all of those pollutants in a way that's going to allow it to still, maintain the level of service that we're asking to. Mainly, can we swim in it? Can we fish in it? Is the water clean enough to withdraw for drinking water? And of course, certainly, I'm not a water treatment expert, but I know the city of Elgin and the city of Aurora work very hard and have protocols in place to be able to account for any changes in the water quality in the river in order to make sure they can provide clean drinking water for their constituents. But it's something that they certainly actively have to manage, and they've been an active part of a group that I'm going to talk about here in a minute called the Fox River Study Group. And as we've continued over the last 20 years to look at these water quality challenges, and so they've certainly been a partner at the table and been very much in tune with what's happening and what's being proposed.
Thank you.
Sure. So again, just a few other slides. Again, we're asking the Fox River to meet a lot of demands with our drinking water withdrawals, our wastewater discharges, our stormwater discharges, all while maintaining, asking it to be a viable source for the remaining biodiversity that we have in the watershed. So these are just a couple of pictures just to kind of remind everybody of the valuable resources that we do have within the Fox River itself. And things are changing. In the Fox River, the population is projected to continue to increase. We know that there's over 1.25 million people in the watershed, including the area up in Wisconsin as well. And we think that that's quickly going to reach 1.5 million people. And so with all of those people, living and working in the river or in the watershed, and utilizing the river, whether it's for their stormwater, their wastewater, those are challenges that we're going to have to work real hard in order to make sure that we can maintain the level of quality in the river. And so the state of Illinois, through the IEPA, as set forth by the Clean Water Act, they have to prepare a report every other year, and it's called the 305B report. And what they do is they look at the conditions in the Fox River, and they assess it to see if it's meeting the standards. And if it doesn't meet the standards, they put out what's called a 303D list And that lists out the impairments or essentially the problems with the individual stream or river systems. And so, for example, this is the list of impairments within the Fox River. The map on the right shows the northern part of the Fox River. If you see the kind of the bottom left portion of that map, that's actually the Tyler Creek. And so you can see kind of the bottom left is the King County area. And so the river is listed as impaired for a host of things. You can see some of those legacy pollutants I had mentioned earlier, for example, metals and PCBs. You know, we're not continuing to discharge PCBs in the river system, but they're actually there from, you know, as historical or legacy constituents. So it's something we find in the sediments and in areas in that. Some of the active impairments that we're actively trying to address right now or focusing on would be nutrients and low dissolved oxygen. And I'll cover a couple of slides here. We'll talk about those things specifically. You can see the areas that are shown in red on the map. Those represent the actual stream segments that are listed as impaired. So the entire Fox River is listed as impaired, and primarily that's for the nutrients and low dissolved oxygen. So when they go out and they do their sampling, look at the water quality, they look at the macroinvertebrates, the little bugs that live in the river system, they sample the fish, and they basically put together this composite assessment, and then they identify what they believe the problems are. And the low dissolved oxygen, which is caused by the excess nutrients in the river system, always tends to come to the top of the list as one of the primary problems. And so if anybody was out in, I think it was probably at the end of September, maybe even early October, I know through the Geneva and St. Charles area, you probably saw conditions similar to this. There was a proliferation of algae and duckweed in particular all across the river. I know we received a number of calls, and I myself had a number of inquiries on the green sheen that was on the river. And again, we were in the middle of a drought, very low flow conditions, and that just exacerbates these nutrients that are discharged into the river, again, 24/7 from the wastewater treatment plants, as well as what washes off periodically during storm events. And so what happens is when those nutrients wash into the river system, they give off, the algae gives off oxygen during the day when the sun is shining, but when the sun goes down, they are respiring and they're actually consuming oxygen. They can actually pull the oxygen out of the water, which stresses the fish and the macroinvertebrates and that kind of thing. And so when we go back to this profile of the Fox River, this is how, when you put all of these things together, we talked about how the river was very steep and was very conducive when the settlers came out to build a series of dams for mechanical water power to drive the industry. But on the flip side of that, and you can see the statistics that are shown in the bottom left, by constructing all these dams and backing up the water, they essentially had turned the Fox River into a series of interconnected bathtubs, such that 47% of the total river mileage is actually considered impoundment. So it acts more like a lake rather than a free-flowing stream. I'm sorry?
That was impounded?
That 47%, nearly half of the river, is in an impounded condition rather than a free-flowing stream. And then when you look at the area of the river, so if you're looking at an aerial map of it and you measure the surface area, again, it's about 55% of the area of the river is actually within these dam impoundments. And so that has a significant impact on the water quality in the Fox River. So when we focus in a little bit more about the dams, we'll kind of transition into that. Below the dams, we have free-flowing segments, we have high biodiversity because we have variability in the velocity, the depth of the water, because the water is moving swiftly and around all of the cobbles and gravels, we have a higher dissolved oxygen. The nutrients that are in the stream system are actually distributed across the entire bottom of the river. And with that higher biodiversity, and we're speaking there in terms of the diatoms, the bacteria, the macroinvertebrates, all the little bugs in that are living in the river, and they actually do a pretty good job of consuming those nutrients and assimilating those. So the challenge that we see, though, is, again, so if that's on the right-hand side of this picture below the dams, but you contrast that to the left-hand side of that picture above the dams, we interrupt the flow of sediment through the river system. So we get fine-grained sediments tend to settle out behind the dams. They bury all of that good river cobble and gravel habitat. So there's less macroinvertebrates. The bottom of the food chain kind of becomes a little bit of a desert. And so therefore there's less fish. the water's slower moving, it tends to heat up more. Remember, it's wider, it's deeper. And so what happens, you get a really poor condition upstream of the dam. So for example, when the IDNR goes out and does all of their sampling for the fisheries, they always find at least several magnitude or several orders of magnitude higher diversity in the number of species and the total number of fish below the dams than we do above the dams. So we know that they definitely have an impact on the ecosystem, but we also know that they have an impact on the water quality. And if we think about it, it kind of makes sense if we go back to this slide here, and we said that 55% or 50% of the entire river from north to south is in this impounded condition. It should be no surprise that that creates some significant challenges in trying to meet the water quality standards, basically trying to keep that dissolved oxygen high enough to support the diversity in the river. And so in addition to those chemical and biological impacts of the dams, certainly everybody's probably aware of the safety aspects or the challenges that we have with the dams in terms of public safety. And that's because the dams themselves were constructed by people like me a long time ago, people like Jody, engineers. We want to be very efficient in how we're going to discharge that water. They designed those so that they wouldn't scour out below the dam and cause the dam to fail. So they constructed these stilling basins below the dams. You may have heard them referred to as a roller, and essentially it's a way to just dissipate the energy there. So it's very efficient at dissipating the energy, but the problem is they create a keeper system that if anybody gets near that, they could get sucked into that, and it usually ends in a fatality. And we've had a number of fatalities, thankfully none recently that I'm aware of here in the Fox River. There's been a number of fatalities, I know, on the Kankakee River in Wilmington, for example. We had some fatalities many years ago in Yorkville, and that kind of drove that process to retrofitting the dam there. So, but that's another aspect besides the water quality and the biological impacts of the dam, but public safety is certainly something else that needs to be considered. So just a couple of slides. We talk about all of these different problems, and of course there's never a simple answer as to why these things happened. And likewise, there's never a simple answer that there's a one size fits all. We should just do this and then everything would be fine. And of course, everybody tends to work in their own silo in their own area. And so if the challenges with that is that if we're not really talking with one another and coordinating, collaborating, we can have these kind of larger problems that manifest, such as what we see in the Fox River with the ongoing water quality. And the good news is that we've kind of gotten out of those silos of late, and people have been working together. And so we're gonna talk about that. Of course, there's a number of agencies that are working on these. And again, this is where we have a challenge with. We want to make sure that everybody's not just working within their own silo between the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers. We're looking at the Clean Water Act versus wetlands, the IDNR on dams and flooding, the local governments like Kane County or the municipalities looking at their stormwater ordinance, and the MPDS looking at the water quality aspects of their stormwater. We need to make sure that everybody's working together. So moving forward and the future of the Fox River and how we really are at a crossroads here. I think the county's done an excellent job of trying to forecast out and get out ahead of some of these things. For example, we talk about the county's stormwater management ordinance and the aspects that are put in place there to keep the rainwater as close to where it falls as we can, preserving the green infrastructure, so those remaining wetlands and things like that, promoting water quality BMPs to clean that water. So we call that like site scale green infrastructure. So those would be those best management practices that we're asking folks that are developing to construct to infiltrate and clean their water. Then when we think about the bigger picture in terms of the Fox River, it's important to look at what improvements can be made to the water quality of the point source discharges, as well as looking again at the dams themselves and recognizing the impacts they have on the river itself. And so working together with multiple jurisdictions, multiple agencies, and that we're able to kind of move that process forward. And so one of those aspects is this group called the Fox River Study Group, of which Kane County is a board member of that group. It's existed for about 20 years. And what the Fox River Study Group has been doing is looking at really what are the problems within the Fox River and what can we do to address those? Where can we get the most bang for our buck? And for example, there was an interim report that was published in 2015. We have a new report that's going to be submitted to the IEPA in December of 2022. And our findings so far have really showed that there's kind of a combination of recommendations, a combination of improvements that need to be made. We certainly recognize that the nutrients being discharged from the treatment plants need to be reduced. And many of the plants are working very hard, coordinating with the IEPA, to meet those target goals. But the question has become as to how far down should they restrict those nutrient discharges versus are there other opportunities that would be more cost effective so that we're not spending all of our money at the treatment plants and maybe we can spend less money in order to achieve the same goal. And so that's what the Fox River Study Group's been working on. One of the findings is looking at making changes to the physical river system itself through dam removal and or significant modifications to those dams, that could allow the Fox River Watershed as a whole, all of the entities, the municipalities within the watershed, to realize a lot of cost savings by not having to throttle down these treatment plants discharges to very minuscule amounts of nutrients, and rather do some improvements to the river to basically open it up to a more free-flowing condition to allow it to better assimilate those nutrients that are in the that are being discharged into the river. And so the goal there is to look at what would be the impact of removing many of the dams on the Fox River. And so that's been looked at. You can see there are two main stem dams that have already been removed, South Batavia and the Herds Island or North Avenue Dam in Aurora. I got a couple of slides that I'll show you on that. And we'll kind of go through some of these dam removal projects that have occurred in the Fox River watershed and around the area. So I mentioned the two dams on the Fox River. Those dams were kind of not in a downtown area. The only major dam here that's been removed in a downtown area was on the Des Plaines River. That's the photos at the top, the Hoffman Dam. But we've had several dams that have been removed on the tributaries in the Fox River, particularly here in Kane County. And so a couple of those, for example, would be Kane County Forest Preserve, and Kane County worked on removal of the dam at the Camp Twendowee on Brewster Creek. There's been a dam removal at the Creek Bend Forest Preserve on Fearson Creek. There were a couple of smaller dams that were removed on Tyler Creek. This one was up in Judson University. There was another smaller one that was removed in Wing Park up in the city of Elgin. And again, as I mentioned, we had the two largest dams that have come out in this area, both within Kane County. One was the South Batavia Dam, and the other was the North Avenue Dam. This is showing the list of ownership. And of course, that's one of the things that kind of drives this dam removal process and the decision-making process of whether or not to remove the dam. And then in terms of who owns it, the state of Illinois owns many of the dams on the Fox River. You can see those are highlighted in yellow. The ones in green are owned by either the municipalities or King County Forest Preserve District. For example, they own the South Batavia Dam. They also own the Carpentersville Dam. And we'll show a couple of slides that in just a moment. So the South Batavia Dam was removed in 2005 by the King County Forest Reserve. That was about a $1.5 million project. You can see the before and after. There's really not a lot of changes. If you look at the aerials on the right, the spillways were removed. This dam was kind of an interesting dam in the sense of this was actually constructed, even though there was this River and Harbors Act of 1899, this dam was constructed in the very early 1900s. There was a powerhouse located where Funway was, and that provided, the powerhouse provided the electrical energy for the old interurban line there. And as the story goes, one summer, the river was so low that the powerhouse didn't have enough cooling water, so they had to shut their generators down. And some of the dignitaries on the 4th of July were stuck on this interurban line and were not very happy. And lo and behold, the very next year, the dam was constructed adjacent to the powerhouse so that the water level would never be too low. So it's kind of interesting. Things were done a little quickly back then. But of course, once the interurban line shut down, the dam became derelict and didn't serve any purpose. And so that's why the Forest Service looked at removing that in 2005. Likewise, the North Avenue Dam at the south end of Aurora, that was removed in 2006 by the city of Aurora. Interestingly, that dam was actually constructed in the 1950s, I believe. And the sole purpose of that dam, there was no historical dam there for like a mill or anything. That dam was actually put in place because, and again, records are sketchy, but the story is that we all know that the city of Aurora had combined sewer overflow. So when it would rain, the sewers would overflow and go into the river. And so that would create, a rather noxious condition during certain times of the year, things being hung up on the sides of the riverbanks and that. And so it became such an issue that at one point in the 1950s, they decided to build a dam to essentially raise the water level to kind of drown out those areas and keep things flowing through. So again, with all of the improvements in treatment and reduction in the combined sewer overflows, the dam wasn't needed. So the city of Aurora removed that dam in 2006. The Yorkville Dam was a dam modification project, and this was done by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. And this project was about a $7 million project. They wanted to address the safety aspect of the dam itself, so they removed the dam and built a step dam in its place. The city of Aurora, the constituents were very adamant that they didn't want to lose their dam impoundment. And so they opted to build this whitewater bypass channel that you can see on the right side of that photo. And so this is an option, although the interesting thing with this is, if you recall the slide, that the colored side that showed the dam and no fish on the left and all the fish and the diversity on the right. The challenge with dam modification projects is they don't address any of the water quality, and they address very few of the water or the biological issues in terms of fish passage and biodiversity.
Excuse me, Wallace with the question.
Yes.
I know that St. Charles has proposed a similar dam to what Yorkville had. They're taking out the dam and then putting a step sort of dam for recreational whitewater use. Have you looked at that project, and do you have any knowledge if that's going forward and what the impact would be of that?
Yes, I actually have slides on that here.
Okay, all right.
I can skip through.
No, that's okay.
Let me go through a couple other ones, then we'll touch on that, and then I know I need to turn this over. So I think everybody's familiar with the King County Forest Reserves project to remove the Carpenter Dam up in Carpentersville. That project is ongoing. That's going to be about a $1.5 million project. They're slated to remove that in the fall of 2022. That project's funded through the IDNR. So the IDNR, Office of Water Resources, providing the funding for that. I've been coordinating with the Forest Reserve District a little bit on that. The Fox River Study Group as an organization actually has spent a considerable amount of time and some money to actually do pre-project monitoring with the intent of doing post-project monitoring of the mussels and the fish and the water quality, so that we have some really good baseline data on this dam removal project, as it's one of the larger dams to be removed, certainly larger than the South Batavia and that North Avenue Dam. So I'll skip past that. The Batavia, City of Batavia is also looking at either removing or modifying their dam. This is a picture of the dam under low flow conditions. You can see the dam weir itself is completely exposed, and that's because there's a large breach over on the east side of the channel. And so in all but the larger flows in the river, at no base flow condition, the water does not go over the dam. It actually goes around the dam. And so interestingly enough, if you look at the 1932 topographic map of the city of Batavia, you can see that the river actually flowed on both sides of the main part of the downtown Batavia where the city hall is. And so that was filled in over time. Again, the dam was constructed to provide mechanical water power. As those things were no longer needed, then the industries moved away. So it's just kind of an interesting little tidbit of what that area looked like and how that was modified. Of course, now we have the Depot Pond. We can see the remnants of that. So they're undergoing, they're at the concept stage now and doing preliminary cost estimates. And I don't believe they've actually voted yet on whether or not they're going to remove or modify the dam. I know the DNR is heavily involved in this, and the DNR has said that they would fund the removal of the dam, but they wouldn't fund replacing the dam with any kind of a new structure. Again, because they recognize the issues that are still created by impacting the water quality, fish passage, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a number of different alternatives that they're considering. I put all these in the slideshow so you guys can look at those. I don't have time to go through all those now, but they range anywhere from $4.5 million up to $13 million, whether or not they're going to replace the dam versus do a simple removal. And a lot of those costs for even that $4.5 million number really is a lot of that cost is driven by how they're going to address preserving or modifying the depot pond area, which has there's a lot of interested parties in that, adjacent landowners and things like that. So that's kind of a complicating factor in that. I think removing the dam itself would be less than half of that if the depot pond isn't factored in. You had asked about the city of St. Charles. The city of St. Charles put together their Fox River Corridor Master Plan a number of years ago. I believe they're actively looking for funding sources in order to construct their proposed modification. This is the concept plan as they've laid it out. And as you had mentioned, it basically preserves the upstream impoundment and recognize there's a large recreational boating constituency upstream of the St. Charles Dam. And so they would want to preserve that, but they're looking for a way to allow fish to move upstream and paddlers to move safely downstream. So this is something that they're looking at doing. Again, like I said, it doesn't really address the water quality aspects. It addresses a little bit of the fisheries aspect, but it'll be interesting to see how this project, if it does move forward, how it moves forward from the permitting aspect with the Army Corps of Engineers and et cetera, et cetera.
So that's 3 dams right there?
Well, essentially, I mean, technically it's one long dam structure. So the dam structure actually goes from North Avenue all the way up to the old Chicago Great Western Railroad Bridge up there by Salerno's. So, but there's basically 3 large rock structures. So they're basically stepping it
The
down.
proposal?
This is a proposal. Yeah, it's just a concept plan that they've been working with. There's just another example. Again, the artist's conception of what that may look like. This project would be many millions of dollars. I think that's why they're actively looking at other funding sources and funding opportunities. They're looking at it as a way to perhaps spark economic development and revenue in the downtown St. Charles area. And so the state of Illinois actually put together a report, and you can see the numbers there were listed out for the actual removal cost. So this gives us kind of a good snapshot of what the actual, just a pure removal would cost on any of these. And you can contrast these to some of those projected numbers if you're looking at addressing other issues like the depot pond or like a stepped modification type structure in St. Charles. And so again, just in summary, we rely on the Fox River to provide a whole host of services for the members and the municipalities and those that live and work in the watershed. And so there are many ongoing challenges, and we're continuing to work through those. And it's very important that everybody has very open dialogues about these and understands all of the challenges that we face. Because once the resource is gone, it's really hard to get it back. I just thought these are some interesting pictures for the fishermen out there. I think a lot of people are startled to realize that there are 4-foot-long fish that are living in the Fox River right outside, the county building and, at various parts throughout the river.
Fish are those?
Those are muskie in the top 2 in the bottom right, and then the bottom 2 on the left are flathead catfish. Really good flathead catfishing in Batavia below the dam. And that's all I have.
Questions?
Edible catfish. Yeah.
Are the fish edible in the Fox River?
That's kind of a loaded question, I guess.
It depends upon how loaded
There is
the
a
fish
consumption,
are.
there is a fisheries consumption advisory for fish in the Fox River. Typically, the larger the fish, the older they are, the longer they've been feeding on smaller fish and the fish on the, the macroinvertebrates on the bottom. So they tend to bioaccumulate, other toxins, mercury, for example. And again, we're not discharging mercury into the Fox River. Mercury, believe it or not, it's actually coming from atmospheric deposition that's coming out of the sky, but it tends to accumulate in our waterways and therefore in the tissues and that. So I know there is a mercury advisory. So, but I think it's just limiting the number of meals that you have per day or per month. And it depends on, if you're, an older person versus children versus, pregnant women, that kind of thing.
Is that mercury coming from coal burning?
That I don't know. I just know it's listed as atmospheric deposition.
Mr.
Yes.
Caius?
I believe it is.
I believe so too.
Mhm.
It was a loaded question. Ms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was a really in-depth presentation. Thank you, Rob. And on that same note, could you send this out to all the members, all the other county board members? I know the county board member that have brought this up at one of our meetings is from the north end, so it'd be good to share it with everybody.
Sure. I mean, we can certainly share all of the slides, and obviously they're in the agenda. So I'll
Yeah,
work with Jody to make sure that gets out.
yeah, that's great. Thank you.
It's a complicated topic, so I'm sorry. I know
It
it took a long time
is.
to go through, but you can see there's many pieces that come in together, but it's important that you
Mhm.
understand all of these different facets instead of focusing on just one aspect. So
This is a great, any other
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Who said that? Cheryl? Oh, okay.
Cheryl, that was Cheryl. Sorry.
Thank you, Cheryl. Mr. Brown?
Thank you. Brown speaking. Great presentation, Rob. I got a couple questions for you though, regarding with the condition of the existing dams and the condition of the water below and above it, like you've explained. Removing the dam is obviously the very best thing for the health of the water, right? But when you do the proposals like Batavia and St. Charles have got where they're stepping it down, you're still leaving some sort of little impoundment behind each one in order to get the impoundment you want when you get further north. Is that solving the problem, or is it just kind of I shouldn't say solving the problem, but is that making the issues of the poor quality better? Or is it kind of it's the best we can do and try to keep the impoundment that the people desire?
Well, I think generally speaking, the smaller the impoundment in terms of the area of the impoundment and the height of it, the smaller that is, the better it is for the river. Again, we know that from a water quality and a fisheries perspective, biodiversity, the free flowing stream is always going to be better. But of course, we have, there's a lot of things that are being asked or a lot of desires for uses of the river. So we have to try to find that compromise. So, for example, I think removing the dams is probably going to be a long-term process, probably on the order of 30 or 50 years. But by that point in time, we may see, many of them removed. Some of them may not for, again, various reasons. For example, I know, St. Charles, there's a heavy recreational usage up there. And so that's one of the kind of give and takes that, people are going to have to make.
And then the other point that you brought up that I got interested in was if the dams were removed, that we may possibly not have to be doing some of these upgrades to the sewage treatment facilities. We could maybe accomplish the same goal by having a free flowing river. Is that, like I know Batavia, for example, is spending millions and millions and millions. I'm talking like 60 or $80 million improving their treatment facility in order to get it up to the upcoming EPA regulations. Has anybody really tried to say to IEPA, if we remove all the dams on the river, will we have to spend this money on the sewage treatment facilities to get these upgrades done?
Correct. And that's exactly what the Fox River Study Group is working on right now. And that's what this report, what it's actually called the Fox River Implementation Plan. So the idea is it's a fairly detailed plan that's going to go to the IEPA that's going to explain what we would like to see everyone in the Fox River, again, the dischargers, the municipalities, with what we'd like to see everybody to do in order to meet the water quality goals, which again is to keep that dissolved oxygen up, keep the diversity up in the river. What we found is that it's kind of interesting. So we didn't talk a lot about stormwater. Stormwater is important, and we want to reduce the amount of stormwater. We want to filter that's being, for its discharge into the Fox River. But what we found is that when you look at the river itself, the Fox River, okay, it's really stormwater is a very small piece of the puzzle. The wastewater, which is coming out 24/7, 365, that is a much larger impact on it. And if you think about it, it makes sense because when it's not raining out during the middle of the summer, like we had this past August, September, that's when the flows are the lowest. It's mostly treated wastewater. So we also get our most bang for the buck in those treatment plants. But the challenge is that the wastewater treatment plants are already committed to spending a large amount of funds in order to meet the current standard, which is being below 1 milligram per liter for their phosphorus discharge. And then what the Foxford Study Group is working on and advocating, and our data suggests that trying to take it down much lower than that, let's say down, there'd been talk about bringing it down as low as like 0.1 milligram per liter, so 1/10 of that. And the problem, of course, is that the cost for treatment, it's not a linear cost. It escalates very quickly. And so what the Foxford Study Group has been doing is doing the water quality modeling to actually determine and say, look, if we take out a number of these dams, we don't have to come down to that 0.1 and still achieve the goal in the river.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I have one more question. Are we in any danger of getting Asian carp in the Fox River?
That's a good question. I think because of the Asian carp issue, first of all, it is challenging to keep out any invasive species like that because, frankly, people will take, they can pick them up and bring them over the other side of the dam or that kind of thing. And so that's a challenge. I know we see that on the Des Plaines River and the Chicago River system, and there's a great amount of money that's being expended to keep them out of the Great Lakes. Within the Fox River, I think the decision's been made with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources that's why the downstream most dam, which is, excuse me, down there in Ottawa. So the Dayton Dam itself, which is a large dam, it actually provides a little bit of hydropower, a tiny bit. And so because that acts as a barrier to the Asian carp coming up from the Illinois River, I think that long-term that dam will be left in place.
Okay, thank you. I'm a kayaker and they're so big that they can jump out of the water and slap you in the face.
Yeah,
Never happened to me because
I've seen pictures of it. My son goes to Bradley and Peoria, and I've seen that on Peoria Lake, and it's quite interesting.
it's horrifying. Okay, any other questions? Thank you so much. This
You're
is
welcome.
very interesting. Whatever we can do to help you, help the river, let us know.
And if anybody has
Excellent
any
presentation.
questions, feel free to reach out to our department, to me directly.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Okay, thank you. Recycling and solid waste. Is this your last meeting, Ms. Jarlin?
Yes, it is.
I would like to recognize Ms. Jarlin for 10 years of fabulous service to creating our recycling project or making it move way forward for King County. And we will miss you dearly. And if anybody else wants to say anything to Ms. Jarlin in appreciation for all her hard work and your understanding of the laws that we have to follow. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
I just add to what you're saying. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I don't think anybody's as dedicated to saving the earth as you are. So it's very special.
There's a lot of us out there. Thank you.
Yeah, and best wishes to you. Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Comment.
Well, I have one item today. It's a resolution before you authorizing a contractor for the Household Hazardous Waste Service, the home collection program that we run. This is a year-round home collection service, as many of you probably recall, and it serves residents in the northern 6 townships of Kane County. So Burlington, Dundee, Elgin, Plato, Rutland, and Hampshire. And it also provides services in the cities of Geneva and Batavia and the Mill Creek SSA. This is a 5-year contract with a mutual option for 3 additional 1-year periods. So it's an 8-year contract potentially. And we had 2 bidders come in on this. Our current contractor, US Ecology, and a new company, Clean Harbors. They're not a new company, but new bidding for this service. And I did a cost analysis and an analysis of the RFPs, and it showed that Clean Harbors comes out at the best cost, best service. So that is who we have recommended for a contract.
That's the short, sweet version. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, any discussion?
I move the resolution.
Motion,
That
thank
way-
you. Second? Mr. Wodnicki, seconds?
Wonecki seconds.
Seconds, okay, thank you. Please, any more discussion? Hello? Please call the roll, clerk.
Allen,
Allen, aye.
Caius,
Bias, yes.
Molina,
Paulina, yes.
Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Wallace,
Wallace, yes.
Woznicki,
Yes.
Bates.
Bates, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jarlin.
you.
Sustainability, let's move to Ms. Ivy Clee.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Chair Bates. I'm going to be giving a quick presentation on the Judicial Center solar project, just an update for everyone. So looking at the progress of the project planning that we've done so far. So Jody and I meet weekly with our project manager, Jeremy Horoff from GRNE Solar. We talk about what site activities are going to be going on, if there's anything we need to do for that week, any items we need to get to them or they need to get to us. So we're in constant communication with our project manager, and also I've been communicating with the neighbors, keeping them updated on any kind of site activities, if they're going to be seeing anybody on the field that day. So that's still constant communication. And then I was just going to go over some complete items, some pending items and future items for the project. So we have interconnection agreement that's been approved by ComEd that happened in November. The land survey has been complete, and we've also had the private locates completed as well. Our phase 1 environmental study is complete. There weren't any major issues that were a result of that study. The pending items that we currently have that we're working on, the civil engineering, we're still waiting for preliminary drawings to come in. And once we have those available and we've reviewed them, we will bring them to the committee and show everyone what those look like. The geotechnical engineering and procurement are both also in process. The landscaping plan, we are currently waiting to discuss that with the neighbors and also with the landscaping architect until we have the civil engineering drawings back. So that will most likely, we'll review discussion of the landscaping plan in the new year. A quick update. So Karen Miller brought a tree planting grant with the Chicago Region Trees Initiative. She presented on that a few months ago. And I reached out to the coordinator for that grant and asked if Kane County might be an eligible entity to apply. And they were really excited when they heard about this solar project and the landscaping that we're planning to do with planting trees. So we're going to be able to work with them as a part of this tree planting grant. They will provide 10 deciduous trees and 10 evergreen trees and work with us on where those trees will go. But we're going to be getting some assistance with funding for the landscaping plan. And that will also happen in the new year when we begin to discuss the landscaping plan with the architect and the neighbors. And then future items that we'll be touching on in 2022 will be electrical engineering as well. So that's where we're at with the solar project. As of right now, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to let me know. Also, just a quick note I want to touch on from last week. Jody and Chris Allen and I had a meeting with ComEd. They reached out to us that they were interested in working on some energy efficiency facilities assessments. So they provide free assessments to customers. And I was in touch with some other ComEd representatives for some other business, and they reached out saying that they would be interested in working with us to provide a free assessment for the Judicial Center and also the jail. So we've had preliminary conversations with them, and we're hoping to be able to get that started in the new year. So that will look like a energy audit of the building, and then they'll provide a report to us with recommendations on where we can improve energy efficiency in our buildings.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank
Great.
you. Any questions?
Just Caius here, just remind me the private hookup things that are located, that's just what we're talking about, just to hook up directly to the jail, right?
Yeah.
Or the,
Mhm.
thank you.
Madam Chairman, this is Alan.
Yes, Ms. Allen?
Uh, Ivy, this would give us baseline information so we could see how our figures improve over time. And congratulations on finding tree money. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you to Karen Miller for that opportunity, because we wouldn't have known about it otherwise. So we're really excited about that. And the Chicago Region Trees Initiative is also very excited to work with us on that project. As far as the facilities assessment, that would give us a basic understanding of baseline where we're at right now, and then what kind of ComEd energy efficiency programs might be available to us so that we can improve energy efficiency, save on utilities, that type of thing.
Thank you. Nicely done.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Mr.
Question, what, do you know if we get that grant with the trees, what the savings would be for us?
I think, I don't have the exact number, but I believe that the trees, when we did an initial financial assessment of what the landscaping plan would cost, we were looking at around $50,000. So I think that comes out to be like $750 a tree. So, and we're going to be provided 20 of them, which is great.
Thank you.
Mr. Caius, are you raising your hand?
No,
Oh, okay. Sorry. Out of the corner of my
that's a
eye.
motion.
Yeah. Did you
I
did you
apologize.
Scratch or something? Itch, scratch an itch. Okay, is that the end of the comments? I believe, so any new business? Okay, I would like to make some comments, and that is, this is the completion of 1 year of my being on the board and being the chairman of the Energy and Environmental Committee. And I want to thank all of you for all of your hard work and contributions and sticking with me through thick and through thin. We have some great plans for the coming year. We're going to do some special water initiatives. We're going to continue our solar initiative and expand that until every building in the county that can hold solar panels has more solar panels on it. Ivy and I will be working on the climate action plan to see if we can take the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus action plan and complete one that's customized to Kane County. And we're going to work on energy efficiency, which was part of our plan for this year. So thank you, everyone. It's not too late to save the planet, but we better hurry up. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do with this committee. So thank you for everything for this whole year. And let's look forward to 2022 with even better initiatives. Is there any executive session necessary today? No?
Put the reports on
Not for this
file.
committee.
Okay.
Yeah.
State's attorney?
Oh,
There's no closed session, there's no minutes that occurred that need to be released, so.
Okay, so this release of
Yeah.
closed session minutes, there were no closed
We're
session
no closed
minutes.
session minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I would ask unanimous consent that we place the reports on file.
Thank you very much. Do I have unanimous consent?
Yes.
Nod will
Yes.
do. Okay, thank you. I believe we are ready to adjourn.
Madam Chair, Cheryl here.
Cheryl, yes? Mr.
I want to
Eckert?
thank you. I want to thank you for your leadership for this last year too. It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Ditto.
Thanks. Motion to adjourn?
Yeah. Well, Nikki moves.
So Nikki,
Wallace, second.
Wallace seconds. All in favor, just say aye.
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 Thank you.